Let's start with exceptions in Java. Okay, how exceptions are handled, and what are the different types of exceptions, and what actually exceptions are, and how you can define your own exceptions, how exceptions are going to help you, and how exceptions are why exceptions are implemented in Java or any programming language. That also we'll discuss in this class. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's go to certain basics of exceptions. Let me open a web page from which we can find certain. One second, where is the one second, two, three. Mm, exceptions is not there. Okay, okay. So the screen is clear,
Yeah.
right? Of course, exception is something which is an exceptional event. So when you write certain code, right, and you have gone through first two stages, that's writing the code, editing that, compiling that, then when you start running the code, if it behaves something differently than what you have expected, okay, and the program terminates, right? Suppose you have 10 lines of code and something happens in that, like 2-3 lines of code has executed, then you don't get a chance. The compiler, the Java executor, it doesn't execute the rest of the lines, it terminates abruptly. Then we call that an
Mhm.
exceptional event. Okay, we call that an exceptional situation, and an exceptional event occurs so that it doesn't proceed further, right? So such a certain events are called exceptions. So exceptions can come at the second or third layer that we used to discuss, that's compilation stage or the execution stage. Sure, certain exceptions which can they actually they don't generate, but compiler asks you to handle those exceptions. So what we need to do if certain scenario happens, we need to either handle those exceptions, right, then proceed with our general type of
Mhm.
coding what we used to do, general execution should proceed. Or if exceptions comes, we need to pass it on, like whoever is calling me, I'll pass my exception to that person. So basically in Java what happens, there is a method chaining. Okay, first there is some system level JVM method which is calling your main method, right? From your main method you are calling another class method. So in the meantime, somewhere like some exceptional event comes and the code breaks. So if you are skipping that exception, if you are letting the exception go, then from there the method execution will stop and it will come back to your main method. And if you are handling that in your main method, that's fine. If you are not handling, if you are letting that go, it will go to the JVM and the JVM will show that these are the problems which happened, like which made you, which didn't let the program execute properly. Okay, suppose I want to read some data from a file. Okay, so the program that I'm writing, it's basically going to open a file in read mode, right?
Mhm.
Then it's going to read the contents and display that in a console or do something on that. So the basic input to that program is going to be a file name, a fully qualified file name, which is going to be the path and the file name with extension, proper name. So suppose the name is wrong, like the file doesn't exist. So if you believe, if you need to read the lines from the file, then whatever you expect to happen after reading that file, opening that file in read mode and reading line by line or word by word, letter by letter, then the problem is going to happen. Like those code are not, like they can't work if the file is not there, right? So that's an exception. Okay, so certain exceptions with file, like file not found. So then certain exceptions with the permission. Okay, in systems we used to manage permission, so user is given some permission. So the process that is started by a user, if that user doesn't have permission to read the file, right, user doesn't have the permission to write into the file, then certain exceptions comes. That's a system level exception which is chained to your Java. So Java just says the system doesn't allow me to read from that file, write into that file. That's an exception. Okay,
Is there
suppose
someone listening with exceptions also in system level exceptions?
not actually system level exceptions. Java has wrapped it up for you. So if it's a permission related issue, Java will throw you a permission exception. Or if the file doesn't exist, that's a file not found exception. Or so there are lots of IO exceptions. If you're trying to write into something and the IO, like it breaks, it doesn't like you don't write that properly. So there can be certain IO exceptions. So there are lots of exceptions, and there is a great hierarchy of exception. Like on the top, As I have already told you that every class in Java, they extend the object class, right? So on the top you will find the object class, then some exceptions, right? There are certain types of errors. So the exception is something which is either created by the user. Okay, if you are giving a wrong file name, that's the user's exception. User has done this, right? If the JVM, okay, suppose so that can be because of like not writing the code properly, you can get some exception. Maybe the resource is not available, for that reason you're getting some exception. If you're writing some data into a file that's in network and suddenly the network fails, suppose that the Wi-Fi gets stopped, like you are not getting an internet signal, then the Java process is trying to write into the file over the network, the network resource is not available, you'll get certain exception. So there are different types of exceptions which you will get. Okay, and
Okay.
there is one more type of such situation which comes into place, which we call error. Suppose the JVM, it doesn't get proper memory from your system has like run out of memory. That's going to be some sort of exceptional state, but we don't call it an exception because neither you can write some code which is going to handle that, okay, nor you can like, nor
Mm-hmm.
Java can do anything because Java doesn't have any memory left out in the system. So those situations are called errors. So we basically go out of memory or the stack space that is there to just hold the variables and all. So maybe that stack space is full. Or so such in situations, these situations are called errors in Java. So let me
So
show you.
those
Go on.
those will be out of memory kind of thing will be a runtime error, right? Not a compile time error.
I didn't get you. Inherited as in?
Running out of memory
Yes, yes.
will come under runtime error.
It's a runtime error. No, it's at runtime, but we don't call it an exception. It's just an error. It's a runtime error only.
Okay.
Okay, that's an exceptional situation, right? We don't know that's going to happen, but we know that if I'm going to open a file, there is a chance that the file may not be present. Okay, I may not get an access to read from that file. So certain errors, certain events which can happen and which can stop your program execution, right? So those exceptions are something which you need to handle at the compile time, because after compilation you don't have to do anything, it just runs. Okay, you just gets an environment, then it starts running. Okay, so certain things which are very much mandatory, which are very much required by the programmer, by the developer, which the developer needs to handle, these exceptions are coming under a different group which we call a checked exception. Okay, checked exception, the user cannot run them without checking those exceptions. So such an exception can come, you have to handle that this file is not available. Let's display some message to the user that the file is not available, I'm not able to read from the file. Let's go ahead with some different approach. So those things are something which you need to check. Okay, if you just leave it open, if you don't check it, and if suppose Java allows you to go ahead, then you'll not be able to like complete your program execution properly if certain situation, certain thing happens. And certain things are there, like you are creating an array list, okay, or you're creating a list collection and you're putting certain data into that, and the
Mm-hmm.
collection is going to be very much dynamic. You don't know how much data is going to be inserted, like that data
Yes.
also depends upon the situation, how much users have registered, that much user objects you're going to create. So that's very dynamic, so you don't know how much data is there in the collection. If you try to access a particular index data from that collection, then definitely
Mm-hmm.
the collection is going to throw you array index out of bounds exception, because that index is not there. So it's either going to give you a null, or if you are using an array, then if you go beyond that array index, then it's going to throw some error, so throw some exception, that's array index out of exception. So there are different, like lots of types of exceptions. Okay, so
Okay.
certain
Yes.
these exceptions we'll see in like details, but let me show you certain example. This class hierarchy of exception, you can see object class is at the top, right? So this is the class which is at the top. Everybody used to extend that class. Okay, everybody is used to like they have this class in the as the super class. Then we have throwable. Like throwable is something which is just below object, and errors and exception. As I have told you, error is something which depends on the system. If something goes out of memory and all, we don't have anything to do. So that error part is different. Okay, and exceptions are different, exceptional behaviors. So these are the exceptions which the user can understand, user can handle, or user can do certain things on that. So let's see what are the runtime exceptions. Runtime exception is something which will occur at the runtime. Okay, like I said you, based on the array size maybe 2, and you're maybe accessing the fifth element from that array, then it's going to throw you some exception. That's at the runtime. Okay, compile time exceptions are also there, so you can get a list of I think over here you can see, okay, these are the unchecked exceptions, runtime exceptions, and here is the checked exception. These exceptions, they occur at the they actually don't occur at the compile time. These exceptions can occur in future, so they say that you need to handle them, otherwise the code is not going to be compiled. Okay, here is an example of compile time. If you're trying to read a file, right, so here what you are doing, you are trying to open a file, right, this location up, you're trying to open a file, so it will show that file not found exception is not handled. So this is the time of compilation. You can see Java C and the file, and so you're trying to compile it, still it's not compiling because you have not handled this file not found exception, right? And this read and write, they're doing some sort of operations over the network. They're trying to, maybe they're trying to read or write something into the file which is locally present, which might be present in some other location. So so these methods also, they also throw certain exception. And okay, runtime exception, programming bugs. Maybe you have written something wrong, maybe there is an object, like you have created a reference like student equals to new student, then it's mandatory that new student object is going to be created, and that's going to be assigned to the student reference. But suppose you're keeping student equal to null, and you're trying to access the student reference, student dot get name, so that's going to throw some null pointer exception. So the value of that student reference is not known at the compile time. When the code starts executing, when the code is executing, then you'll get to know the value of that. So at that time the runtime exception can come, which is called null pointer exception. So there are different types of exceptions. Let's start with the simple Eclipse code, and let's see.
Okay. So
And
exceptions are basically that we can predict that it may fail.
right. I'll show you how exceptions occur and how they stop the behavior of what we have thought, what we have expected to run, and what has happened. So exceptions will they'll damage your execution, code execution. So let's see how exceptions behave in Java. Okay, we're going to create an exception example. The source class, I'll create a class. Okay, com dot test dot exception. I'll show you the example of try catch example. Okay, so I'm writing a main method. Okay, and I'm having a private static integer array as marks equal to new integer array that's going to contain 4 elements. Fine, 0 1 2 3. So in the first line what I'm doing is I'm assigning the values to marks. New int array, let me assign the values as 1 2 3 4. So we are having 4 integer values in this marks variable. So I may not assign any values as of now, I may not define it also. So now I have, this is the process in which you are creating a new integer array, as well as you are specifying that there are 4 elements in the array, so the array cannot contain the 5th element. So if I want to print that sys out the whole array, or may say all marks. Okay, all marks is something which I'm going to print over here. Then I need a for loop because arrays, they don't want this way. Int mark in, okay, mark plus give a space. Fine. Now I have defined this marks array. I have entered 4 values in that, like, right, I have entered 4 values in that, and let's see if I can access them properly or not. So this is going to, this line is going to be executed, the marks is going to be ready with 4 values, right? Then this line is going to be executed, it's going to print all marks, that's it. Then this line, this loop is going to print all the values that are available in the mark. Okay, Suppose I just
Correct.
want to print the mark first mark of 10, that's plus marks and 0th index. Okay, because in the 0th index you have the first mark. So then this line is going to get you the first mark that you have, that's 13. So let's run this code and let's see how what type of output it is giving us. Run as Java application. So you can see first mark is 13 and all the marks are like 13, 22. So in the same order that we have inserted them. Now what happens, I am going to write the fifth mark available. Suppose the programmer doesn't know, he has just used the fifth mark. So this is the compilation time. I have saved the code. You can see there is no error in this. Okay, but I know that after some time when this code is going to be executed, it's going to access this fifth element, that is the sixth element in the array, fifth index or the sixth element from the array, but we have just four elements. So this is going to give you some exception, and this exception will break the code, and these codes are not going to be executed anymore. So this is the exceptional scenario. Let's run this code and let's see what is happening. So you can see the first thing it has written is first mark is 13, that it has done properly, right? The second line, exception in main thread Java lang index array index out of bounds. So it says that this
Right.
index is not there, right? So this exceptional situation, it has like stopped your program execution. So if you want to detect certain situations, and if you want to give your user a particular like message, suppose this message, if you give it to the user may not know anything. Try catch example, what is this, and this code line number, this index 5, user is not interested in that. So if you want to give your user like a proper message that come on boss, this is something which you have done, this is not available in my database. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to handle this much line of block of code, because I expect the error to be coming out of somewhere in this 5 or 6 line. What I'm going to do
Mm-hmm.
is I'm going to use the try catch method of Java. You can see I have created a try block, I've started it over here. Then I can end that try block in this place, because I know from within these blocks I'm going to get certain error. So this is the code which might break, and if this thing breaks, my code execution is going to be hampered a lot. So I'm going to try this block. So within this, Java will try to find if certain error comes, then Java will come to this place. This catch, if something happens, suppose this line we are going to get certain error, right? Then this is not executed, right? Fine, but at least show
Mm-hmm.
the user some message that these things have happened. So if certain error has occurred within this statement, we can handle that over here. We can write catch exception. This is the exception class which is available in Java, exception is. So whatever exception comes, it will be handled automatically in this place. And you can say to the
Okay.
user that something went wrong, but this message is, at least it so it has some meaning to the user, but the user gets the log, he can't understand anything. So if you run
So,
this code,
if we are fetching, if we are printing some message in the catch block,
mhm.
the exception that is thrown by the system will not be shown, like array index out of bound exception will not be shown to the user. Only something went wrong will be shown to the
Yes,
user,
yes,
right?
yes, 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 yes. It also
Okay.
handles lots of security features. So if you don't know, and if you have written the code that some exceptional situation has come, it may show the database name, table name, and the particular field name, maybe the user or something details which is not mandatory. It can print that over here, right? But that is something which should not be shown to the user. The user, it might be a malicious user who is trying to access the system. You can get certain information, but if certain
Okay.
situations occur, you can handle the exception. If you're not sure about the exception, whichever exception is going to come, if you're not sure about that, you can use the exception class. And as you know, this is the super class of all, right? All the exception, they are going to come under this exception. So whatever exception comes, they will be caught automatically by this reference that we have over here, and that exception is going to be coming over here. So we can say that something went wrong, and if you want to show the user that message that what went wrong, then we can get a message from this. There is a method called e.getMessage. So like it can say just out of bounds, like the bound is not available, like fifth index is not available. Such a meaningful message which will come, not the stack trace that you have
So
seen
that
over here.
okay, that message we need to provide, or it will be given by the
It will be
system.
given by the system, because this exception whichever was generated, that was not generated by you, right? So the system will have certain message field and certain data which will be passed over here. Let's run this code and let's see what output is coming. See, now the
Yeah.
red thing has gone, something went wrong and it's just saying 5. Okay, you may say that the index is not available. So if you are sure about this, that index out of bounds exception is going to come, then you don't need to handle the super class. Okay, if you are sure that index out of bounds is coming, this is the index out of bounds, so you can handle this one only. Okay, so let's handle index, that is array index out of bounds, right? Array index out of bounds exception. Then you can say that the something went wrong can be a little more meaningful. You can write data not found for this range. You can say this way also. So it is going to handle the array index out of bounds exception, because that exception is going to be generated somewhere in this block. So if you run it, it's going to give you a proper message, and for this range, if you give a little space, it's going to give you a better output. Fine. So this is how we handle the try and catch. We write the try
E
catch.
here is the
So
E is the object of array index
E,
out of bound
okay.
exception
So
class.
okay, if you forget everything, just focus on this thing. What is this? This is your class, okay, and
Yeah.
this is a class reference, right?
Okay.
So somebody is calling this method and passing certain type of data over here, right? Fine. Now, so if you forget everything, just forget this. This is a method you are calling a catch method. You are defining a catch method. This is the block, right? And you're passing. You're telling that this method is going to accept a reference of this class
Of
type.
type. Okay.
Fine. So this is going to
Yeah.
be called by the system when certain event, certain exceptional situation comes. The system is going to call this method or this block, and the system is going to pass that exceptional string over here, and you can show that over here.
Okay.
Okay.
So it is mandatory to give some exception type parameter in the catch block. We cannot
Yes, yes. You
keep it
cannot
up.
you
Keep
cannot
it
access
empty.
what type of exception is there. If you don't have these, you cannot show the message, right? So that is mandatory. That's the rule of Java.
Okay.
Fine. So suppose in the same code you may face certain exceptions which is different from this exception. So you can have multiple types of exception. Okay. So this catch block that we are having over here, it's specifically handling the array index out of bounds exception. Okay. Suppose I have some code which can generate a different type of exception. Let's create a string, private string name equals to null. By default, I don't want to give any name to that string, any value to that string. So I don't want to define any name. Suppose I'm going to define the name as, now I can define the name over here. You can see the name was, there is no name declared over here. It's a
Right.
static field. Now I can define the name over here. Okay, now the name field is it has got some value. This reference points to some value, not to a null space. Okay, so you can access this one. Suppose I just want to print all marks of then your name over here, the value of name. Fine. So this is
Yeah.
going to all marks of Anuradha, then it will print all the values, all the marks that you have, right? So if you try to run these, suppose let's comment this line out, because this line it fails now because we don't have the fifth index. So let's run it and let's see if it is giving us a proper output or not. So you can see the name field has displayed over here, right?
Mhm.
If I forgot to assign some value to name, now the name field is containing a null value, but the compiler doesn't know that. When compiler starts running it, compiler will assign some value to name, or it will assign null to it. So it tries to print the value of name, but if it doesn't contain anything, if it doesn't contain any value, then it's going to give you some error. As of now, the name is containing null. So in Java, null can be represented as null in a string. So it will automatically convert to null, a string format null. But if you try to access, if you try to call a method on that object, on that reference, it's going to give you some error. Let me give you one example. Name dot, if you want to show your name in uppercase, okay, name dot to uppercase, and if you try to execute that code, the name is going to be always in uppercase. Okay, fine. Suppose what I am doing is this is the string object. Okay, this is the string reference. I try to call a method which is going to convert every character in that string to its upper format. Suppose that string object, it doesn't have any existence. So when the string object is getting existence over here, The string object is created
Right.
and that's assigned to the name reference. Suppose I didn't initialize, I didn't assign any value to that. Now there is no value, that's just null. Okay, there is no existence of string. If I try to call null dot to uppercase, then to uppercase is not defined in null, so it's going to give you a null pointer error. So let's
Okay.
execute the code and let's see what is happening. See, first mark is
Hmm.
13, right? Fifth mark is not going to be executed because we have commented it. This catch block is not able to handle this exception that we have, this null pointer exception. You can look at the code like the console again, you'll get a better idea. Exception thread mail java lang null pointer exception. Okay, it says that in this method, this class and this line number, you're having an exception which is a null pointer exception. Basically you are trying to access a null reference. That's the exception which we have. Suppose I want to handle that also, then I'm going to write a multi catch. Okay, how you're going to write like multiple amount. See, we are trying to handle both the classes, they have the same name, right? So it's going to give you duplicate error, so we can handle the different types. So basically that's another class, right? So null pointer exception, this one you can handle like this. Okay, and you can see that data is not available, not available. Fine, then you can display the message. Okay, what data was not available in that. Okay, let's run this code now and let's see. So you can see there are two catch blocks now, and these two catch blocks, they're always protecting this try block. So any type of exception that comes, if that exception is either this class or this class or a subclass of these two classes, that is going to be handled over here. Fine,
Yes, yes.
let's run this code and let's see the output. You can see data is not available and saying that null. So what it is trying to say you that this some field is null which you are trying to access. So if you don't want to give some message because it doesn't make any sense now, you can remove that. Okay, and so this can be, now this can run and this will work fine. Okay,
Okay.
and
So,
in Java 7, I think 1.7 and above, you have got I'm using Java 1.8 as the default compiler. You can see Java SE 1.8 is used over here, right? So this has the feature to accumulate multiple types of uh, exceptions in a single line. Now I am going to access null pointer exception and array index out of bounds exception in a single line. So this way also you can handle two types of exceptions. So any of these two exceptions is going to come, it is going to be handled over here. So this is the
okay.
way you used to handle multiple types of exception in the same line, right? If you run
Okay.
this, it's going
So,
to give you the same output. So now it's saying data not found for the
okay.
range, but this doesn't make any sense, right? That was for array index out of bounds. So let's undo our code.
Yeah.
Let's not try to be very much smart because it's not making any sense. Let's remove that code. Fine. So you have any doubt in this try catch example? Let me maximize the screen. Okay, now you can go through the code. You can ask me
Um,
questions.
so, as you said, exception is the
Mm-hmm.
main class of all these array index, outer bound exception, and null pointer exception
Mm-hmm.
classes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
All these two extends from exception class.
Right.
So
Not
instead of
directly.
having multiple
They may not be.
catch,
They may not
can
be
we have only
accessing.
one exception?
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
have only one exception. That's exception E, the way we had it earlier. Okay.
earlier, right? So
Huh.
that will avoid us having multiple catch statements. Or which one is good, to have a multiple catch or having a single catch with the exception class
Perfect, perfect. It
reference?
depends upon the use case. If you have multiple types of work, multiple types of processes executing within the same method, then suppose you are reading from a file, at the same time you are trying to access a string, at the same time you are trying to modify the index value, then for the client who is calling it, you want the client to know what actually went wrong. You may tell the client that you don't have sufficient data and you are trying to access this much index value. This range is not available for you. For that scenario, you need to specifically access this array index out of bounds exception. If you handle exception, you are not sure if the file error is there or IO error is there or something happened to the string which is null or something like this array index out of bounds has occurred. So for certain scenarios, you need to handle every exception individually. Okay.
Okay, we want to give user a very specific uh, output
It's
whenever an
11
exception
o'clock.
is there, then we have to use a specific class type of variable.
Perfect, perfect. So let's move ahead. Let me show you certain thing, like certain, suppose I want to, like, whatever has happened the user after executing the entire thing, I want to say the user goodbye. That's a good message which I want to show the user. So if I am writing that code over here, okay, suppose I want to write, like I want to say goodbye and goodbye, and I want to display that to the user. Now the exception might come somewhere within these three lines, right? And this last line is not going to be executed and I can't greet my user, right? So I can bring that line to the bottom. Okay, so I want whatever has happened, maybe the system worked properly, maybe some error came, but at the end I want to show the user that goodbye. So what I can do is I can put a finally block. Okay, this block is going to be executed finally, like when everything has come, like everything has executed, finally you are going to execute this at the end. So the finally says that whatever has happened, even if the try block is executed completely or some of the catch block is executed completely, then this finally is going to be executed. So now we are going to get the error over this line, right? But you see the last line, the goodbye, is even displayed. If you don't write, if you don't make any exceptions, now the code is going to work properly, right? We have the value of name,
Mhm.
null pointer is gone, we don't access the fifth element, sixth element, array index out of bounds is there. So none of the try catch block is going to be executed, but still you are going to get this finally, that goodbye message is still there, right? So this is the use of finally block. If you're opening a file, it's not mandatory, but you should close the file, because the file will be open for other resources, other processes to modify or to do work on that. So if you're opening a file, it's mandatory to close the file in the finally block, because if the code breaks within the try block, the maybe in the last line you have written to close the file, that thing is not executed, right? If you are opening a database connection, that may not close properly, so you have to write the file close and database connection close, all these operations in the last line, okay, in the
Okay, so
finally block.
finally block is whether we have an exception
Mhm.
and it is handled or
If you don't have any
not
exceptions,
handled.
huh,
Yeah, or we don't. No. First, if we don't have an exceptions, then also a finally
finally
block
is
will
going to be
be
executed,
executed. And
right?
if we have an exception and whether it is handled or not handled, in that case also the finally block is going to be executed.
Perfect, perfect,
Okay,
right?
right. Okay, yeah.
Now I'm
So
going to
one
tell you,
question.
okay, go on, go on.
Can we have more than one try block?
Of course, it depends upon the developer how you're going to write the code. If you're not satisfied with this try block, you can create another try block after this also, or you can have multiple try inside this try also, you can have another try. That's the way you used to nest, like you can nest the classes, you can call nested methods, nested for loop. You remember the same structure is going to be followed
Yeah.
over here. The try block which is within the try block, the inside try block has to close, has to catch it, like catch whatever exception is going to happen inside, that has to be finished first. Then you can have the upper try block with its own catch and finally block. So you can have any ways of handling the try and catch, and you can have nested, you can have
Okay.
further, you can have nested, like you can have another try catch block after the try catch block. So that's possible. That's the basic way you used to write Java code. That's good.
Okay, so there is no restriction. We
No
can have one
restriction, no
try with
restriction.
multiple catches, or we can have
Perfect.
individual try catch blocks, or
Right,
we can have nested try catch.
right, right.
So in that nested one, we will have a try catch pair inside one try catch, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay, then one part in this exceptions is exception chaining, right? That also, let me give you one example of that. Okay, what
And
actually happens, how the exception is chained and how the exception flows, let me give you one example of that. Okay,
yeah, and how that nested try catch execution flows.
let me try to give you that thing also. So this is the case. This line is going to give you this array index out of bounds exception,
Again, execution.
right?
Right.
Let's handle this thing over here. And so what we need to do, we need to uncomment that, and we need to put another try over here. Fine, now this try is handled and I need to catch it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle it over here. Okay, now that thing is handled. So if this exception is going to come, it is going to be handled over here. And I think there is no error in the code. Now we can compile that. You just go through the code, you see any difference like you used to do with for loop. It's very simple. It's very similar to that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's run this code. Fine.
Okay. Mm, then- so if we don't have any exceptions in the inner try block,
Right.
the outer try block will be executed after that, right?
Yeah, even if this try, see what we are doing is we're not returning from here, right? The code, if the code is broken from here, and if you don't have any try catch block, then the code returns from here, right? It goes up. So if you handle that, then what happens? This is going to give you some exception, and then this is executed, right? If the exception is there, then this is executed. Then the code starts executing from the next line. Then these things are also executed. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, but earlier when we didn't have anything, this code breaks, then these things are also skipped because it comes to the catch block and these things are automatically skipped. So now if you have a particular try block for a particular statement, then that is handled here over here with the catch block, then these things are going to be executed as well.
Okay. If it is not handled in the inner one, then those system.out.print all
Println and for
marks,
loop, they are going to
these
be
things will be skipped out.
skipped. Perfect.
Okay, so it's like it propagates from inner
Inner to
to
outer.
outer.
Yeah, that's the same structure of all programming languages. That's not going to change.
Okay.
Okay, let's move to the next part of the exception class. Exception thing. Let me give you one chaining of exception example. Okay, let's create a class and let's call it. I'm not having. Okay.
So try catch is the only way of handling exceptions, right?
Yes.
Or do we
Yes.
have any other way of
This
handling
is the only way of handling exceptions because we are handling the
exceptions?
exception, right?
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
exception chain example. Fine. Now let me show you one example of we'll have main method, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I want to have a private static void display name. This is another method, okay? And I want to call that method from the main method, right? I have called that method. Now what I want to do is I'm going to define a variable, a string variable over private static string name equals um, so we have the object defined and the object is not pointing to null. So when I call this method, it's going to print the name. Fine, now it's working fine, it doesn't have any problem. Suppose in the code somewhere you forgot to define this thing or something happens which makes you like remove the reference of that, so you are like basically assigning null to that, and in the meantime somewhere in the code you are going to assign the value, and suppose this code is not executed because of some conditions or certain thing happened and you didn't define this. Now this is going to give you some exception, right? And you can see like suppose I want to access that and I'm going to use this method upon that null reference, then it's going to give you a null pointer exception, right? This is the way it generally happens. You can see the chaining over here, how the exception chaining has occurred. So the first thing in Java that is called is the main method, right? It comes over here, then it calls the display name method, right? In the display name you are trying to access that null reference. So when the exception occurred in this class, still the main class is waiting, right? The main class is waiting for this statement to complete. Now the exception has come over here, it will go back to the caller, that's the main method, and the main method will return back the the flow who has called the main method, that is the JVM. So the JVM will try to give you all the places like from where the exception has started. You can see the first line, it says that there is a null pointer exception, but that exception is generated at this is the class where the exception was generated, display name, method name, okay. Then this is the line number where it was generated, but that was also called at, this is the main method, which like you can see the chaining, right? This is the first place where the exception came, then the main thing where the exception came, right? The exception is propagating back to the caller who has called it, right? Let me like give you one more example in which you can see how we used to skip the exception to the caller. Suppose the caller is interested in handling the exception, so he'll have a try catch block, right? The caller can bring this statement into this and he can handle. He knows that somewhere we have a null pointer exception, and maybe this is the statement which we are going to handle. So he has handled the null pointer exception over here. So this is a general execution. This is not abnormal execution. If the abnormality happens, we are handling it, right? We're not breaking the code. So after that, I may print sys out goodbye, right? That is the thing which I want all the time. Not sys out, it's going to be goodbye. Fine. So if I'm handling the null pointer exception, it's going to print like I failed. So now what is going to happen? The exception will be generated over here. Then it will come to this block and it will say I failed. It couldn't print the name. It will say I failed. It will come back to the display name method, and the display name method, it didn't generate any exception. It just like it caught that exception and it ate up that exception. It's not so throwing that exception outside. It basically handled that exception. So this method block will, like this statement execution is going to be proper. It's going to be fine. Nothing bad will happen after that. So again, this statement is going to be executed. Fine. If I'm not handling this exception, it's going to like come to this place and it will come back to the main and it will go away, right? So now what is going to happen? Let me run this code and let me show you. See, it has worked fine. I failed. It has said I failed. Then it came back and it didn't return back from here because it was not abnormal now. It has just handled, it has just caught that exception, and now the next statement has also executed. Fine. Suppose now the display name says, no, I didn't
Yeah.
get you. What happened?
Hello?
Yes,
No,
yes.
nothing.
Nothing, na? So suppose the display name says I'm not interested in handling of all these exceptions. Let's do the normal way of like handling the exceptions. Now what happens? This thing is going to fail. Now this will come back over here. Display name method throws some exception. Now some exception has come from this method. It's not going to execute the next line. So you can see the goodbye method is goodbye string is still missing because it went back from this place, right?
Okay.
Fine. Now,
Yeah.
now let's make some more changes. Suppose the display name method says that suppose the display name method doesn't have anything like this. It's just a simple way, a simple method execution. But the display name method says that suppose some sort of exception may come in my like in the method block that I have, and I'm not going to handle that. I'm going to throw that exception to the caller who has called me. Throw null pointer exception. So it is basically it's going to be throws null pointer exception. See, this statement says that if null pointer exception is generated, then it's going to throw that null pointer exception from this method to the caller. Now the caller is red because the caller is saying that you need to handle the exception. It's a checked exception now. Somebody is going to call the display name method. The display name method throws some exception. You need to handle. Exception refers to the missing type null pointer exception. Okay, one second. Let's call it there is something you are doing with the IO, right? And it says that I'll be throwing the, if something related to IO exception comes, I'm going to throw that out. I'm going to throw that exception from this place. So I'm not going to handle that. You can say this one. And this method, now this method has made the specification that whoever is going to call me, he has to handle this exception, right? He cannot skip that. Without like this exception being handled, I'm not going to allow compilation. So display name, it is being like the main method is trying to call the display name, but it has not yet handled that. So if you put your mouse on that, it will say that unhandled exception of the type IO exception. That's some exception which is checked, which needs to be checked because this method says that I'm going to throw this exception anyway. So if it comes, you have to handle it. So in the display name, in the main method, when you're calling the display name, it's mandatory to put that in try catch block. And let's see the same way that we did earlier. We're going to put a try block and we're going to put this method catch. So we can catch that specific exception which is being generated from this class, or we can put exception e also. But in Eclipse, the Eclipse knows that this is going to throw IO exception. So you can control space over here, the specific exception, that very exception is going to come. IO exception is there, and you can handle now. So IO has went down. Fine. Now you can see we have done certain different things over here. If the IO exception comes, this method is going to throw that back to the caller. Okay, and the caller needs to handle it. So this is something the display name method has mandated, like whoever is going to call me, you have to handle it. This thing, it doesn't come normally, it comes when you have certain exceptions, certain custom exception which you want. Suppose you want to say that user is not allowed to display the name. So user exception is something which you have generated, like student exception. So that's a specific exception which you have created, and you want to throw certain exception, and also it enables the user to throw that method specifically. If you want to throw that method over here, you can use throw new IO exception. So this way also you can throw the exception. So this is going to throw an exception from here, and you may say that IO is not possible now. So when you try to execute the code, it's going to execute this line properly. Fine. Then it's going to execute this line and it's going to throw some exception. You are specifically, like you are like hard coding this exception, you need to throw this exception somewhere. Okay, now you have thrown this exception, and that exception is going to be thrown by this method. So you have to say this method throws IO exception. So if you try to give some exception, you are try to generate some exception within the class and then the method, then this is mandatory. You need to give this IO exception, throws IO exception, and this thing becomes mandatory for whoever is calling to this display method. He has to handle it also. Fine, there are lot many things which has happened in this method. You need to go through them, then you can understand. So
Having that difference between the throw and
throws. Okay, let me give you a better example. You will be able to understand. Suppose the name is null, and I just want to handle that using some if else block. If I want to say that I want to check if name is equal to null. If the name is null, I want to say to the user that I want to throw some exception, like suppose, okay, I'll give you one more example also of creating your custom exceptions, then you'll be able to understand that. Let's create a new class. Suppose I want to create some exception which is specific to my application. I want to say that this is a user exception. Okay, user access,
not thrown by the system.
and they're not part of the system, they're not part of Java JDK. This is some exception which you have created. This is user access exception. Okay, let's finish this. This is a simple class now, right? But I want to make it an exception class, so you need to extends exception. So you are extending the behavior of exception now. This exception class has its own behavior, but you need to say that no, I'm giving some more exceptional behavior to you. So what you are going to do is you are going to create the methods, like the constructors from exception class. You need to extend them. So we can do that using source, and you can go to generate constructors using field. No, not the constructors of the superclass. You need to call the constructors from the superclass. So you'll see all these exception constructors are available from the superclass. You can import all of them. Now you have got a sort of like a list of exceptions over here. Now if you want to throw this user exception, if the user is null, right, your program says, your logic says that if the user is null, I cannot access, I just cannot go ahead. I am going to throw some user exception. User access exception. This exception you have thrown and you want to show some message to the client. User, sorry, a name is not defined. So this is the method, this is the exception that you want to throw. That means whoever is going to call this method, there is a chance, if the name is null, there is a chance this exception can occur. So this exception needs to be specified over here. So when somebody defines this display name method, he says that if the username is null, I am going to throw this method, throw this exception. So he says in the method signature itself, this is the exception which I can throw, right? So you have you have used throws exception. This is going to mandate the caller to handle this exception. Now the caller is not going to handle the IO exception, is going to handle the user access exception. So you can say if you want to display the message, now the message is something which you have created over here, right? This is the message that you created. Now you can print e.getMessage, e.getMessage, right? Now see, this is the thing which I want to do, but before that I need to check if the name is null. This is not going to take work. So if this thing is executed, this exception is executed, these things are not going to be executed. It will come back from this place to the caller and the caller will handle it this way. So let's run this code and you can get a better idea of. So it says Anuradha, then it says bye. It doesn't have any method message associated. Yeah, it should throw this message, but we should use a different constructor then. Undo. Let me give you one more example. Okay, this is the message. Okay, let's give it a debug and let's see. Debug as Java application. Now you have got the exception. It's going to call the display name method. Okay, the name is not null now, so this exception is not going to come. So for that reason it was working fine. Let's comment this name out and let's run the code and let's see the output. Now you can see this name is not defined. This is the message that we have sent from this place. So this is the custom exception that you can generate on your own. And so you got this, right? Why this throws is used. If the method wants to say to the person who is calling him that you need to, this is the exception which may come. So the person is going to handle that anyhow. This becomes a checked exception now, right? So the user is checking that out over here. So the user cannot go away without this try catch block. If you try to move it up,
Check exceptions before running the code, you need to have a catch block for that.
perfect, perfect,
Okay. Otherwise, the compilation error will come.
right.
Okay.
So
And
I think
unchecked exceptions, you will not get a compilation error.
yeah, yes, you don't know how to check them. Unchecked exceptions is something which is not required by you to check them. It can come at any time, but if you want to check, you can have a try catch block and you can check them. It's not mandatory to check them during compilation. This compilation will stop without this.
So what kind of exceptions are checked exceptions?
Sorry.
Uh, what kind of exceptions are checked exceptions?
Like this one is a checked exception. Without checking that, you cannot proceed, right? All the user defined exceptions which are coming out from a message, like come from a method, they're going to be checked by the caller, and the certain exceptions like related to the file which you are doing with the compilation, during compilation they needs to be checked. They're also checked. Anything that's going to be checked during compilation are called checked exceptions. Without that, you cannot proceed.
So the IO exceptions relates
Yes,
to
compilation
file
time.
related stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
Fine now.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think this is enough for like handling exceptions, and it covers almost every part of exception that you can, like, generally we used to handle all these types of exceptions. And if you have any more doubt, you can always ping me and you can ask me, you can put